The sun was high in the sky, shining brightly over the lush green fields of Uncle Charles's estate. It was a beautiful day for a family reunion, one that had been planned for months. Relatives from all corners of the country had traveled far and wide to come together for this special occasion. There were long tables set up under colorful umbrellas, loaded with plates of food, fried chicken, potato salad, fresh fruit, and homemade pies. Children ran around playing tag, their laughter filling the air while adults mingled, catching up on old stories and sharing updates about their lives. Among the crowd, sitting quietly near the edge of the gathering, was Lena. She sat in her wheelchair beneath the shade of a large oak tree. Her short brown hair framed her face, and she wore a simple blue dress that matched her calm demeanor. Despite the lively atmosphere, Lena seemed distant, almost like she didn't quite belong. She wasn't alone. Her presence was acknowledged by nods and polite smiles, but no one made an effort to include her in conversations or activities. Lena had married into the family 5 years ago, and life had changed dramatically for her since then. A car accident just before her wedding left her unable to walk, forcing her to rely on a wheelchair for mobility. While it was a challenge, Lena adapted well and remained positive. Her husband, Daniel, stood by her side through everything, offering unwavering support. But today, Daniel wasn't there, and he had stayed back in New York because of work commitments, leaving Lena to attend the reunion alone. For most people, attending a family event without your spouse might not seem like a big deal. For Lena, however, it felt different. Over the years, she'd noticed how some members of the family treated her differently after the accident. At first, they acted sympathetic, asking questions about her recovery and offering words of encouragement. But as time went on, their tone shifted. Sympathy turned to pity, and eventually pity gave way to something uglier, resentment. They saw her disability as a burden, a flaw that made her less worthy of respect or attention. Today was no exception. As Lena watched the others laugh and chat, she couldn't help but feel like an outsider looking in. Some cousins whispered behind their hands, glancing her way every so often. Others avoided eye contact altogether, pretending not to notice her sitting there. Lena tried not to let it bother her. She reminded herself that these moments would pass, and soon enough she'd be back home with Daniel, where things made sense again. But then there was Greg. Greg was one of those cousins who always had something to say, whether it was funny, rude, or both. He was loud, boisterous, and loved being the center of attention. Today he was particularly animated, cracking jokes and telling exaggerated stories about his latest business ventures. Lena could hear him clearly from where she sat, even though he wasn't speaking directly to her. Every now and then his voice would rise above the rest, drawing everyone's focus. Greg wasn't alone in his antics. His sister Amanda joined in too, chiming in with sarcastic comments and playful jabs at anyone within earshot. Together, they formed a duo that thrived on teasing and mocking others. And unfortunately for Lena, she became their target more often than not. Earlier in the day, Greg had walked past her chair and pretended to trip, blaming it on her wheelchair being in the way. Everyone nearby laughed, including Amanda, who added, "Maybe we should move her somewhere else so she doesn't cause any more accidents." Lena forced a smile, pretending it didn't hurt. She knew better than to react. Arguing or showing emotion only encouraged them to keep going. Instead, she focused on the small details around her: the rustling leaves above her head, the distant hum of cicadas, the faint smell of freshly cut grass. These little things brought her comfort, grounding her in the moment. As the afternoon wore on, the mood shifted slightly. People began moving away from the tables and spreading out across the estate. Some headed toward the lake for a swim, while others played games like cornhole or volleyball. Lena stayed put under the tree, content to observe rather than participate. She liked watching the kids run around, their energy infectious. Occasionally, someone would approach her to ask if she needed anything, a drink, a snack, or maybe a blanket. But these gestures felt hollow, obligatory rather than genuine. It was during this lull in activity that Greg hatched his plan. He had been watching Lena from afar, noticing how isolated she seemed compared to everyone else. An idea sparked in his mind, an idea that started as a joke, but quickly grew into something cruel. Pulling aside Amanda and Jake, another cousin, known for his mischievous streak, Greg whispered his scheme. They exchanged grins, excited by the prospect of causing trouble. "What if we tie her chair to the tree?" Greg suggested, barely containing his laughter. "Just for fun, you know. Nothing serious." Amanda raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure that's a good idea?" "Come on," Greg urged. "It's not like she can do anything about it. Besides, it'll be hilarious." Jake hesitated for a moment, but eventually nodded. "All right, let's do it. But don't blame me if she gets mad." With that, the trio set their plan into motion. They grabbed a length of rope from a nearby shed and casually strolled over to where Lena sat. Acting as though nothing was amiss, Greg knelt down beside her wheelchair and looped the rope around one of its wheels. Lena looked up, confused. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice calm but wary. "Oh, nothing," Greg replied with a smirk. "Just making sure your chair stays put. Wouldn't want it rolling away, would we?" Before Lena could respond, Amanda and Jake joined in, securing the other end of the rope to the trunk of the tree. By the time they finished, Lena's wheelchair was firmly tethered in place. The three of them stepped back, admiring their handiwork. "There," Greg said, clapping his hands together. "All done, you're safe and sound." Lena stared at them, unsure what to say. Part of her wanted to laugh it off, to pretend it didn't affect her. But deep down she felt a pang of humiliation. This wasn't just a prank, it was a deliberate act meant to belittle her, to remind her of her vulnerability. Still, she held her tongue, unwilling to give them the satisfaction of seeing her upset. As Greg, Amanda, and Jake walked away, snickering amongst themselves, Lena reached for her phone. She opened a text message thread with Daniel and typed out a quick note. "Wish you were here. Things are complicated." She hesitated before hitting send, debating whether to elaborate. In the end, she decided against it. Daniel didn't need to worry about her right now. He had enough on his plate already. Little did Lena know her simple message would set off a chain of events that would change everything, not just for her, but for the entire family. The rope around Lena's wheelchair felt heavy, though it wasn't the physical weight that bothered her most. It was the symbolism, the way Greg, Amanda, and Jake had gone out of their way to make her feel trapped and powerless. She could have easily asked someone nearby to help untie her, but what would that accomplish? The damage was already done. They had made their intentions clear. This wasn't just about having fun. It was about humiliating her, reminding her that she didn't belong. Lena took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She focused on the distant sounds of laughter coming from the rest of the family. Most of them were too busy enjoying themselves to notice what had happened. Some might not even care if they did find out. That thought stung more than anything else. Family was supposed to be a source of love and support, yet here she was, sitting alone under a tree, tied up like some kind of joke. Greg, Amanda, and Jake stood a few feet away, still laughing. Greg leaned against the tree trunk, arms crossed, while Amanda snapped pictures with her phone. "This is going straight to Instagram," she said, giggling. "Imagine being stuck with someone so useless." Jake smirked, glancing over his shoulder to see if anyone else was watching. For all their bravado, they were careful to keep their voices low, hoping no one would overhear. But Lena heard every word. Each insult cut deeper than the last, chipping away at the fragile sense of belonging she'd clung to for years. Her phone buzzed in her lap, a response from Daniel. She opened the message, her heart skipping a beat when she read his reply. "I'll be there soon." Just 4 words, but they carried so much weight. Daniel always had a way of making her feel safe, even when everything else seemed uncertain. Still, she couldn't help wondering how he'd react if he saw her like this. Would he be angry? Disappointed? Or worse, would he blame himself for not being there? As the minutes ticked by, Lena tried to distract herself by observing the world around her. Birds chirped softly in the branches above, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves. The sun hung low in the sky now, casting long shadows across the estate. It was a peaceful scene, marred only by the cruel actions of a few individuals who couldn't see past their own insecurities. Meanwhile, Greg, Amanda, and Jake grew bolder. Emboldened by the lack of consequences, they began taunting Lena more, openly. "You know," Greg said, stepping closer, "we're doing you a favor. Keeps you out of trouble, doesn't it?" Amanda snickered. "Yeah, you should thank us. Who knows what might happen if you wandered off somewhere." Lena met their gaze, her eyes steady despite the turmoil inside her. "If you wanted to keep me safe, you could have just asked me to stay put," she said quietly. "You didn't need to tie me up." Her calm response caught them off guard. For a moment, none of them spoke. Then Greg broke the silence with a laugh. "Oh, come on, don't act like we hurt your feelings. You're tougher than that, right?" Lena didn't answer. She knew arguing wouldn't change their minds. People like Greg and Amanda thrived on conflict. The more upset she became, the more entertained they'd be. Instead, she turned her attention back to the horizon, waiting silently for Daniel to arrive. Unbeknownst to Lena, her text message had set off a chain reaction. When Daniel received her note, he immediately canceled his meetings and arranged for transportation to the estate. He didn't waste time calling ahead or announcing his arrival. He wanted to assess the situation himself before confronting anyone. As his private helicopter lifted off from Manhattan, Daniel's mind raced with possibilities. What exactly did Lena mean by, "Things are complicated"? Was she simply feeling overwhelmed, or was something more serious happening? Back at the reunion, Greg and his cohorts decided to take their prank one step further. Amanda suggested tying another knot around the wheelchair to make sure it stayed secure, just in case she tries to escape, she joked, earning another round of laughter from the group. Lena watched them work, her jaw tightening slightly. She refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry or beg for release. Deep down, however, she couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. These were supposed to be her family members, people who shared her blood, her history. Yet here they were, treating her like an outsider, someone unworthy of respect or kindness. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Lena noticed a subtle shift in the atmosphere. Conversations among the other guests began to taper off, replaced by murmurs of confusion. Someone pointed toward the horizon, where a distant hum grew louder with each passing second. Moments later, a sleek black helicopter appeared in the sky, its blades slicing through the air with precision. Heads turned as the aircraft descended onto a nearby field, kicking up clouds of dust and grass. The sudden arrival sent shockwaves through the gathering. Relatives scrambled to figure out what was happening, their earlier distractions forgotten. Even Greg, Amanda, and Jake froze mid-laugh, staring wide-eyed at the spectacle unfolding before them. When the helicopter landed and the door swung open, Lena felt a wave of relief wash over her. Out stepped Daniel, dressed impeccably in a tailored navy suit. His presence commanded attention without effort. Tall and confident, he scanned the crowd with sharp, calculating eyes until his gaze landed on Lena. Without hesitation, he strode toward her, his expression unreadable but his movements purposeful. Greg, Amanda, and Jake exchanged panicked glances. None of them had expected Daniel to show up. Not today, not ever. Their amusement quickly gave way to unease as they realized the gravity of their actions. Tying up a disabled woman was one thing. Doing it in front of her billionaire husband was quite another. Daniel stopped beside Lena, his towering frame shielding her from view. Kneeling down, he examined the ropes binding her wheelchair to the tree. His hands moved deftly, untying the knots with practiced ease. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, his voice laced with concern. Lena nodded, forcing a small smile. "I'm fine. I knew you'd come." Daniel didn't respond right away. He finished untying the last knot and stood up, turning to face the trio responsible for the prank. His piercing gaze locked onto Greg first, then Amanda, then Jake. Each of them squirmed under his scrutiny, unable to meet his eyes. What exactly is going on here? Daniel asked, his tone deceptively calm. There was no anger in his voice, yet, but the underlying tension was palpable. No one answered. Greg shuffled his feet nervously, while Amanda tucked her phone into her pocket, suddenly aware of the incriminating photo she'd taken. Jake looked ready to bolt, glancing around for an escape route. Daniel waited a beat longer before speaking again. If you can't explain yourselves, maybe I should ask Lena instead. At that, Greg finally found his voice. It was just a joke, he blurted out, his bravado crumbling under Daniel's icy stare. We weren't trying to hurt her or anything. A joke, Daniel repeated slowly, letting the word hang in the air. He glanced down at Lena, who avoided meeting his eyes. Does this look like a joke to you? The question hung unanswered, heavy with implication. Nearby, other family members began to gather, drawn by the commotion. Whispers rippled through the crowd as people pieced together what had happened. Some looked horrified, others embarrassed, and a few seemed indifferent, unwilling to get involved. Daniel turned his attention back to the trio. Let me make one thing clear, he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. No one treats my wife this way, ever. His words sent a chill through the group. Greg, Amanda, and Jake exchanged frantic looks, realizing too late that their actions had consequences far beyond what they'd anticipated. And as Daniel's gaze swept over the rest of the family, it became clear that this wasn't just about punishing a few bad actors. It was about sending a message to everyone present. For Lena, the moment was surreal. She had always known Daniel, was protective of her, but seeing him confront her tormentors head-on was something else entirely. Part of her wished she could disappear, to avoid being the center of attention, but another part of her felt a flicker of pride. Daniel wasn't just standing up for her. He was showing the entire family that she deserved better. And as the sun sank below the horizon, casting the estate in shadow, Lena realized something important. She wasn't alone anymore. Whatever happened next, she had Daniel by her side, and that made all the difference. The air felt heavy as Daniel stood silently, his piercing gaze fixed on Greg, Amanda, and Jake. His presence alone was enough to make them squirm, but the weight of his words hit even harder. Let me make one thing clear, he repeated, his voice low yet sharp, cutting through the tension like a knife. No one treats my wife this way, ever. Greg swallowed hard, his earlier bravado completely gone. We didn't mean any harm, he stammered, glancing at Amanda for support. But Amanda was too busy staring at the ground, her face flushed with guilt. Even Jake, who usually thrived on mischief, looked pale and uneasy. Daniel ignored their attempts to defend themselves. Instead, he turned slightly to look at Lena, his expression softening just a fraction. Are you all right? He asked again, his tone gentle but firm. Lena nodded, though she avoided meeting his eyes. She hated being the center of attention, especially when it involved conflict. But she couldn't deny the relief that washed over her as Daniel took control of the situation. For years, she'd endured subtle insults and exclusion from certain family members, always choosing to stay quiet rather than cause trouble. Now, seeing Daniel stand up for her gave her a sense of validation she hadn't realized she needed. Satisfied that Lena was safe, Daniel refocused his attention on the trio. He took a step closer, forcing them to back away slightly. Do you have any idea how humiliating this must have been for her? He asked, his voice rising just enough to command everyone's attention. By now, most of the family had gathered around, forming a loose circle to witness the confrontation. Some looked shocked, while others appeared ashamed, finally understanding the gravity of what had happened. Greg tried to speak again, his voice trembling. It was supposed to be harmless fun. We weren't thinking. That's exactly the problem. Daniel interrupted, his tone icy. You weren't thinking. You never do. He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. Lena has dealt with more challenges in 5 years than most people face in a lifetime. Yet here you are, mocking her for something she can't control. Does that sound like harmless fun to you? Amanda opened her mouth to respond but quickly closed it when Daniel's glare landed on her. Tears welled up in her eyes as she fidgeted with the hem of her shirt, unable to find the right words to justify her actions. Jake crossed his arms defensively, muttering under his breath, "It's not our fault she's different." The moment the word slipped out, Jake regretted it. Daniel's jaw tightened and his fists clenched at his sides. "Different?" he echoed, his voice dangerously calm. "Is that what you call someone who shows strength and resilience every single day? Someone who refuses to let adversity define her? Maybe you should take a closer look at yourselves before judging others." By now, the entire family was watching intently, some nodding in agreement while others shifted uncomfortably. Nobody dared to interrupt or defend the trio. Even Uncle Charles, the host of the reunion, remained silent, his usual jovial demeanor replaced by a somber expression. Daniel wasn't finished. He stepped forward until he was standing directly in front of Greg, towering over him. "I want to know why you thought this was acceptable," he said, his voice steady but filled with authority. "Was it because you assumed I wouldn't find out? Or because you think Lena doesn't matter?" Greg shook his head frantically. No, it's not like that. We were just messing around." "Messing around?" Daniel cut him off, his patience wearing thin. "This isn't a game. This is my wife, a person who deserves respect, kindness, and dignity. And if you can't give her that, then maybe you don't deserve to call yourselves family." The crowd gasped audibly at his words, the weight of his accusation sinking in. Greg, Amanda, and Jake exchanged panicked glances, realizing there was no way out of this. Their reckless prank had spiraled into something much bigger than they'd anticipated, and now they were facing the consequences. As the trio struggled to come up with an apology, Daniel turned to address the rest of the family. "I've known for a long time that some of you don't approve of my marriage to Lena," he began, his voice carrying across the field. "Maybe you think she's not good enough for me, or maybe you pity me for staying with her after her accident. But let me tell you something. Lena is the strongest, kindest, and most incredible person I've ever met. She doesn't need your pity or your cruelty." His words resonated deeply with those listening. Several relatives exchanged guilty looks, remembering times when they'd whispered behind Lena's back or excluded her from conversations. Others nodded in agreement, silently acknowledging that Daniel was right. Lena watched quietly from her wheelchair, her heart swelling with gratitude. She had always admired Daniel's ability to command respect without raising his voice, but seeing him defend her so passionately left her speechless. Despite the awkwardness of the situation, she felt a newfound sense of pride, not just in herself but in the life they had built together. Daniel continued, his tone shifting from anger to determination. "Today proves that not everyone in this family values the same things I do. So let me make myself clear. Anyone who disrespects Lena will answer to me. And trust me, you won't like the outcome." With that, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded document. Unfolding it, he held it up for everyone to see. "Before coming here, I purchased this estate," he announced, his voice ringing out across the field. "It belongs to me now. And as of this moment, anyone involved in today's events or anyone who continues to mistreat Lena is no longer welcome on this property." The announcement sent shockwaves through the crowd. Murmurs erupted as relatives processed what Daniel had just said. Some looked outraged while others seemed resigned, knowing they had brought this upon themselves. Greg, Amanda, and Jake exchanged horrified glances, realizing their actions had cost them far more than they could have imagined. Uncle Charles stepped forward hesitantly, clearing his throat. "Daniel, surely we can work this out," he said, attempting to mediate. "There's no need to be drastic." "There's every need," Daniel replied firmly, cutting him off. "This isn't about revenge or punishment. It's about protecting my wife and setting boundaries. If you can't treat her with basic decency, then you're not welcome in my home." The finality of his statement left no room for argument. Relatives began dispersing slowly, some heading toward their cars while others lingered, unsure what to do next. Greg, Amanda, and Jake slunk away, their heads bowed in shame, knowing they had ruined their chances of staying in Daniel's good graces. As the chaos subsided, Daniel returned to Lena's side, kneeling beside her once more. "Are you okay?" he asked for the third time, his voice softer now, filled with genuine concern. Lena smiled faintly, reaching out to touch his hand. "I am now," she said quietly. "Thank you." Daniel squeezed her hand gently, his expression softening. "You never have to thank me for standing up for you. You deserve better than this." For a moment they simply sat together in silence, watching as the remaining family members packed up and prepared to leave. The sun had nearly disappeared below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of purple and orange. Though the day had started with tension and cruelty, it ended with a renewed sense of hope, for Lena, for Daniel, and for the future they would build together, free from judgment and negativity. And as the last car drove away, leaving the estate eerily quiet, Lena felt a strange sense of peace. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but with Daniel by her side, she was ready to face whatever came next. The estate was eerily quiet now. Most of the family had left, their hurried departures leaving behind only traces of the earlier chaos. Empty plates scattered across tables, abandoned chairs toppled over, and remnants of decorations fluttering in the evening breeze. The air felt cooler as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows that stretched across the grounds. It was a stark contrast to the lively, noisy gathering that had taken place just hours before. Lena sat quietly, in her wheelchair, her hands resting gently in her lap. She watched as Daniel moved around the area, tidying up some of the mess left behind. He didn't say much, but his actions spoke volumes. Every time he picked up a discarded napkin or straightened a chair, it was as if he were reclaiming the space, not just for himself, but for Lena too. This was their home now, even if only temporarily, and Daniel seemed determined to erase any lingering negativity from the day's events. For Lena, the silence was both comforting and unsettling. On one hand, she appreciated the peace after such a tumultuous afternoon. On the other hand, the weight of everything that had happened pressed heavily on her mind. She replayed moments in her head, the cruel jokes, the mocking laughter, the ropes tied tightly around her wheelchair, and each memory brought a fresh wave of emotions. But instead of anger or sadness, she felt something unexpected: clarity. She realized that today wasn't just about Greg, Amanda, and Jake. Their actions were hurtful, yes, but they were also a reflection of deeper issues within the family. For years Lena had tried to fit in, to prove that she belonged despite her disability. She had smiled through insults, laughed off awkward comments, and ignored the subtle ways people excluded her. Today made it clear that no amount of effort would ever be enough for some of them. And maybe, just maybe, that was okay. Daniel eventually joined her, pulling up a chair so he could sit beside her. "How are you holding up?" he asked softly, his voice breaking the stillness. Lena hesitated before answering. "I'm processing," she admitted. "It's been a lot to take in." Daniel nodded, his eyes filled with understanding. "You don't have to talk about it if you're not ready, but I want you to know. I'm here for you, whatever you need." His words brought tears to her eyes, though she quickly blinked them away. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what I'd do without you." "You'll never have to find out," Daniel replied firmly, reaching out to squeeze her hand. His touch was warm and reassuring, grounding her in the present moment. They sat together like that for a while, neither speaking nor needing to. The quiet between them was companionable, a reminder of the unspoken bond they shared. Lena let her gaze wander across the estate, taking in the beauty of the evening. The sky was painted in shades of purple and orange, the last remnants of daylight fading slowly into night. Fireflies began to appear, their tiny lights flickering like stars against the darkening backdrop. Eventually, Lena broke the silence. "Do you think they'll ever change?" she asked, referring to the family members who had treated her so poorly. Daniel considered the question carefully before responding. Some might, he said honestly, but others won't. People can only grow if they're willing to look inward and confront their own flaws. And not everyone is ready to do that. Lena nodded, accepting his answer. She knew he was right. Change wasn't guaranteed, especially when it came to deeply ingrained attitudes. But that didn't mean she had to let those attitudes define her life or her worth. What happens next, she asked after a pause. Daniel smiled faintly. That's up to us, he said. We've already taken the first step by setting boundaries. Now we focus on building a life where you feel safe, respected, and valued. That starts with cutting ties with anyone who doesn't treat you the way you deserve. Lena thought about this for a moment. What about Uncle Charles? Or Aunt Susan? They weren't part of what happened today, but they didn't stop it either. They stood by, Daniel acknowledged, his tone measured. And sometimes, doing nothing is just as bad as participating. But it's your decision whether you want to give them another chance. If they truly care about you, they'll earn back your trust. Lena appreciated his willingness to leave the choice in her hands. She didn't have an answer yet, and that was okay. Healing wouldn't happen overnight, and neither would forgiveness. As the evening wore on, Daniel suggested they head inside. You've had a long day, he said, standing and offering her a hand. Let's get you comfortable. Lena agreed, letting him guide her toward the house. The interior was spacious and inviting, with large windows that allowed the fading light to filter through. Daniel helped her settle into a cozy armchair in the living room, then went to prepare tea for both of them. While he worked, Lena took the opportunity to reflect further on the day's events. She thought about Greg, Amanda, and Jake, their smug expressions, their cruel laughter, their complete lack of remorse until Daniel intervened. They represented the worst aspects of the family dynamic, the parts that thrived on judgment and exclusion, but she also thought about the others, the ones who had whispered apologies or looked genuinely ashamed when Daniel confronted them. Those moments gave her hope that change was possible, even if it would take time. When Daniel returned with 2 steaming cups of tea, he handed one to Lena before sitting down across from her. I know today was hard, he said, his voice gentle. But I'm proud of you. You handled everything with grace and strength. Lena smiled faintly, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. I couldn't have done it without you, she admitted. Knowing you were coming gave me the courage to stay calm. That's what partners do, Daniel replied simply. We support each other, no matter what. Their conversation drifted to lighter topics as the night wore on. They talked about plans for the future, traveling, renovating the estate, spending more quality time together. These discussions helped lift Lena's spirits, reminding her that life was bigger than the pain of one difficult day. By the time they retired to bed, Lena felt a sense of closure. The reunion had exposed cracks in the foundation of her relationships with certain family members, but it had also reinforced the strength of her bond with Daniel. Together, they had faced adversity and emerged stronger. As she drifted off to sleep, Lena realized something important. She didn't need validation from anyone else. Her worth wasn't defined by the opinions of people who refused to see her for who she truly was. What mattered most was the love and respect she shared with Daniel and the resilience she carried within herself. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now, Lena felt at peace. With Daniel by her side, she knew she could face anything. The days following the family reunion passed quickly, blending into weeks as Lena and Daniel returned to their life in New York. The sprawling countryside estate remained empty, its quiet grounds standing as a silent witness to the events that had unfolded there. Though they hadn't decided what to do with the property yet, neither Lena nor Daniel felt the need to rush. For now, it was enough to focus on healing and moving forward together. Back home, the rhythm of their daily lives provided a comforting sense of normalcy. Mornings began with coffee on the balcony, where they could watch the sun rise over the city skyline. Afternoons were filled with work. For Daniel, meetings and calls related to his tech empire. For Lena, creative projects she worked on from her home office. Evenings were reserved for shared meals, conversations about their day, and sometimes movies or books that allowed them to unwind. Despite the calm routine, echoes of the reunion lingered in Lena's mind. She couldn't forget the cruelty of Greg, Amanda, and Jake, or the indifference of others who had stood by while it happened. But instead of letting those memories consume her, Lena chose to channel her energy into something positive: self-reflection and growth. She realized that the experience had taught her valuable lessons, not just about her family, but about herself. One evening, as they sat together on the balcony watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Lena turned to Daniel. "Do you think I should forgive them?" she asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. Daniel considered the question thoughtfully before answering. "Forgiveness isn't always easy," he said gently. "And it doesn't mean forgetting what happened or excusing their behavior. It means finding peace within yourself so you're not weighed down by anger or bitterness." Lena nodded slowly, processing his words. "I don't know if I'm ready to forgive them yet," she admitted. "But I want to try. Not for them. For me." "That's all that matters," Daniel replied, smiling warmly. "Take your time. There's no rush." Over the next few weeks, Lena took small steps toward closure. She started journaling, writing down her thoughts and feelings about the reunion and everything that followed. Some entries were raw and emotional, filled with pain and frustration. Others reflected moments of gratitude for Daniel's unwavering support, for the strength she discovered within herself, and for the opportunities ahead. She also reached out to a therapist, someone recommended by a close friend. Talking through her experiences helped Lena gain clarity and perspective. Her therapist encouraged her to focus on building boundaries and surrounding herself with people who truly valued her. These sessions became an important part of her journey toward healing. Meanwhile, news of the reunion spread quietly among the family. Word traveled fast, especially after Daniel's confrontation and his decision to ban certain relatives from the estate. Some cousins defended Greg, Amanda, and Jake, claiming Daniel had overreacted. Others criticized their actions, acknowledging that they had gone too far. A few distant relatives even reached out to Lena directly, expressing regret for not standing up for her when it mattered most. At first, Lena wasn't sure how to respond. She appreciated their apologies but struggled to trust their sincerity. With Daniel's encouragement, however, she decided to give some of them a chance on her terms. She met with these relatives individually, listening to their explanations and sharing her own perspective. While forgiveness didn't come easily, these conversations helped mend fractured relationships, one step at a time. Uncle Charles was among those who reached out. He visited Lena and Daniel in New York, bringing along Aunt Susan. Their apology was heartfelt, though tinged with guilt for not intervening sooner. "We failed you," Uncle Charles admitted, his voice heavy with remorse. "And we're sorry." Lena accepted their apology cautiously, grateful for their honesty. She knew rebuilding trust would take time, but their willingness to acknowledge their mistakes gave her hope. As months passed, Lena found herself growing stronger, not just emotionally, but mentally and spiritually. She embraced her independence, exploring hobbies and interests that brought her joy. She joined a local art class where she connected with other creatives who inspired her. She volunteered with organizations supporting disabled individuals, using her experiences to advocate for inclusivity and understanding. Daniel supported her every step of the way, cheering her on during moments of triumph and offering comfort during setbacks. Their bond deepened, becoming even stronger than before. They celebrated milestones together, anniversaries, achievements, and quiet victories that reminded them of how far they'd come. One crisp autumn morning, as leaves swirled in the breeze, outside their apartment, Lena looked out at the city skyline and felt a profound sense of gratitude. Life wasn't perfect, it never would be, but she had everything she needed: love, purpose, and resilience. The challenges she faced had shaped her into someone stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. That evening, as they sat together on the balcony watching the sun dip below the horizon, Lena turned to Daniel with a smile. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice filled with emotion. "For everything." Daniel reached out to hold her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. "You don't have to thank me," he replied. "We're a team, remember? Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." Lena nodded, feeling a wave of peace wash over her. Together, they watched as the lights of the city flickered to life, illuminating the darkness with promise and possibility. The road ahead wouldn't always be smooth, but with Daniel by her side, Lena knew she could handle anything. And as the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Lena realized something important. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving, and that made all the difference.